My mom had to take a few years off from her job after giving birth to me. She blamed me for her inability to work, which she detested. My dad was the one providing for the family at this period. He believed that this would be the ideal chance for my mother to connect with me, but it never did. My mother chose to remain emotionally aloof throughout this time rather than attempting to connect with me. She would frequently tell my dad and I that she wished I had never been born because she wasn't suited to be a mother. As a result, my dad would threaten to divorce her throughout a number of arguments with her. My mother would threaten to take me away from him as a form of punishment for him abandoning her, rather than taking her to see a psychiatrist. My mother was obviously unhappy with the way things had gone, both in her marriage and as a mother. My mom frequently left me alone without any concern or attention by zoning out for hours, watching TV at home, or going out with her friends. She made no attempt to hire a babysitter. I was left to my own devices most of the time. During her few visits, she made it apparent that she had no interest in taking on the duties of a typical mother. I don't recall her ever preparing a decent meal for me because she detested cooking. Pizza rolls, mac and cheese, and other frozen foods that didn't require work made up the majority of my diet. That was all I knew for a long time. Since I was too little to understand any better, I didn't mind at the time, but now I see how neglected I was. It was more than just missing home-cooked meals or a good hug. The most painful part was the emotional abandonment. I immediately discovered that I should never complain to my mother about anything. Every time I attempted to communicate my wants or sentiments, it would backfire. She would reprimand me and act as though I was solely to blame, never accepting responsibility or making an effort to make things right. I found it easier to suppress my emotions and keep her from getting upset. I was always trying to avoid upsetting her, always trying to blend in, and always walking on eggshells. I was deeply scarred by the reality I had to live with. Unlike my mother, I felt appreciated and seen by my father. He was undoubtedly the best of the two, but I wouldn't say he was the ideal parent. He had his shortcomings too. He really liked hanging out with me, unlike my mom. He never gave me the impression that he was acting out of duty. It made all the difference because he truly cared about being in my life. As I began to mature, our home underwent a transformation. In the end, my mother returned to work, although she never fully reclaimed the esteemed position she had held before to her leave. She detested having to rebuild her career after feeling that she had already paid her dues and had to start over. It wasn't any easier to be the target of her hatred, even though I could somewhat understand her frustration, losing years of professional advancement and feeling stuck in her situation. I ended myself spending a lot of time alone myself after my mom started working again. I would get home from school, prepare a basic lunch, and complete my assignments. It became a habit, and to be honest, by then I was accustomed to getting by on my own. I had essentially come to realize that I couldn't count on my mother to provide me with much emotional or physical support. My parents still tried, though. My dad and I would go out to supper together on some evenings. My mother never came. As though she were an outsider in her own family, she maintained a distance from them. My dad and I would discuss everything at those dinners. I would tell him everything about my school life, my friends, or whatever was on my mind, and he would tell me about his job, occasionally the fascinating projects he was working on, or office drama. Everything seemed regular during those few hours. It was one of the few times I didn't feel like an afterthought or a burden, but rather like a daughter enjoying time with her father. I truly treasure those times because they made me feel safe and connected. My mom started a new job that needed her to travel frequently when I turned 14. I believe she saw the high-paying job as an opportunity to finally regain some of the professional success she had lost. She chose to take the job without consulting my dad, which resulted in one of the most heated arguments I've ever seen between them. Although my dad didn't mind her working, she would be gone for days at a time for this job, which meant he would have to care for me by himself. Their voices reverberated throughout the home as I listened to them quarrel late into the night. I was the primary point of disagreement. I detested that. I detested being the cause of so many of their arguments. I went to my dad's study later and assured him that I could take care of myself while he was at work and that he didn't have to worry about me. I reasoned that perhaps my parents' relationship would improve if I could only demonstrate that I wasn't a burden. I recall the expression on his face when I said that. Guilt swept over him. As though he recognized that I had been made to mature more quickly than I should have, he drew me into an embrace. It was one of those times when we both recognized the true dysfunction of the situation without explicitly stating it. My mom started her new job shortly after, and she started to go missing for days at a time. The home was quieter, almost tranquil, without her. It wasn't much better when she returned either. When she did spoke to me, it was like she was speaking to a complete stranger. Warmth and a sense of belonging were lacking. She would return home fatigued, give me a fleeting glance, and then either go back out with her friends or go into her room. Despite the fact that we were in the same room, she felt very far away. I had learned not to expect much from her by then, but it still hurt. My parents' marriage was essentially non-existent by the time I was 16. As though they were just housemates, they were sleeping in separate bedrooms. If you're wondering why they didn't simply file for divorce and move on, trust me. I asked myself that question often. In actuality, I believe that they both chose not to get a divorce because it was simpler to continue living in this unhealthy, distant relationship than to deal with the financial and legal complexities of separation. When it comes to alimony, legal bills, and arguing over child custody, things that neither of them seem to want to deal with, divorces may be extremely expensive. My schooling was the only significant investment that my parents truly shared, despite the fact that they both made good money. They hardly spent any money on me other than that. Other than the home expenditures, they didn't have much money to divide because my dad owned the house. They didn't have to quarrel over little matters. They lived under the same roof, but had largely independent lives, each with their own food and car. For my part, I would receive money from my dad each week, which would be plenty to pay for groceries and school lunches. I didn't really anticipate much more, and while it wasn't much, it was sufficient for me to handle. I had gotten used to being in the background while they were preoccupied with their own problems and grievances. As I approached my 17th birthday, I made the decision to celebrate my birthday in a way that was authentic for once. My birthday had always been somewhat of a non-event until that point. Unless I reminded him, my dad, bless him, had a tendency to forget my birthday. He would try his best to get me a cake once I did, and we would either have a low-key dinner or celebrate in private at home. However, it was never more than the two of us. I wanted something bigger this time. I wanted to have a true party and invite my friends over. To my surprise, my father concurred. He helped me organize it and thought it was a terrific idea. Naturally, my mother declined to go. She simply stated that she didn't want to be part, without even bothering to offer an explanation. I honestly didn't give a damn. I had been emotionally and physically accustomed to her absence by that time, so I wasn't bothered by the idea that she wouldn't be present. I finally received what I wanted for the first time in my life, a birthday celebration filled with joy, laughing, and friends. It was ideal for me, but it wasn't ostentatious. For a second, I was truly joyful. I had finally come to terms with the fact that my life was what it was, flaws and all. However, that fleeting moment of happiness was quickly eclipsed by tragedy, as if the universe couldn't bear to see me pleased. It seemed unreal when my dad died. My mother still detested me, and here I was, only 17, inheriting the home we shared. She made it obvious how much she detested me since she couldn't accept that my dad had given me the house. After the will reading was finished, she yelled at me for hours, claiming that I had manipulated my dad throughout the years and that she was the true owner. Then she modified her strategy. She began attempting to persuade me to put her name on the house's deed. Fortunately, my dad's parents, my grandparents, defended me. They ensured that I couldn't be influenced by my mother. Since she was never a decent wife to my dad when he was living, they made it apparent to her that she didn't deserve his house simply because he was dead. If she attempted to compel me to alter the deed, they even threatened to take her to court. My mother became enraged and threatened to leave me. She claimed that because I was self-centered enough to refuse her the house, she intended to prove to me that I couldn't live without her. She seemed to be trying to convince me that I couldn't support myself, as if losing her would also make me realize how much I depended on her. My paternal grandparents refused to give up. They promised to take care of me in the event that my mother left. In contrast to her, they promised to support me through anything, not only until I was 18, but for the rest of my life. My mom followed through on her threat and left within 2 or 3 weeks after my dad's death. My dad had loved and collected comic books for years, but my mom threw out his whole collection before she left the house. It was her last act of retaliation. It is obvious that she did it out of spite, in some perverse manner, to harm me, to destroy him, and to hold me accountable for any resentment she may have had inside. When I was nothing, she said, I would come crawling back to her in a few years. At a time when I was already feeling totally lost, her words were poisonous and intended to tear me apart even more. She left me as though I had no significance to her. It was hard for me to comprehend that she could leave so simply, so soon after my father's passing. I felt as though I had lost both of my parents in a matter of weeks, and the burden was unbearable. As promised, my paternal grandparents moved in with me. They made every effort to give me support and stability during this period. My grandparents were calm, loving people who understood how much I was in pain. They set aside their own suffering to support me, despite the fact that they were also hurting. I was simply trying to get by day by